Sonic is back in his latest and, for many people online's opinions, greatest adventure yet. Now, after the somewhat middling, shall we say, thoughts that people had on the previous game Sonic Forces, of course, a change-up was in order of the game. And a change-up is indeed what we got with this one, ladies and gentlemen. So Sonic Frontiers is basically a different beast than all of the previous Sonic games to date, with, to be honest, the closest I can think about this game in the series is probably Sonic Adventure, due to the fact the way the game is structured. So basically this game here is structured with two major playstyles. You have the open zone, which is the bulk of the game, and in these open zones are essentially everything that you're going to experience. Basically, the whole gameplay loop of this one is a collectathon. So you're going through these open zones, these massive playgrounds filled with rails, boost panels, bumpers, enemies, and so on, all the while collecting specific tokens that are amongst each of the game's islands in order to progress through and essentially continue on with the plot. But of course, not only do you collect tokens by exploring and doing various activities that exist, you're also fighting tons of enemies in order to collect gears. So throughout the course of the open zone, there are Guardian boss battles that you must fight in order to collect gears. And these gears will essentially send you to this game's second major playstyle, which is cyberspace, which are action stages essentially, as like we've seen in previous Sonic games, in order to collect the Chaos Emeralds, because you get keys from the action stages that unlock the emeralds that are littered across the island. Now, the open zone gameplay itself is extremely hyper fun, and honestly, like I said already, it's basically just a gigantic playground in order to run about in. It's filled with tons of puzzles to complete that, if you do complete the puzzles, they offer a form of fast travel in the form of rails that sort of litter themselves around. And they also give you a map that you can use as you complete these puzzles, filling in more and more of a map the more puzzles you do, up until the point you've completed all the puzzles of an island, and it actually gives you basically a teleport button to get to certain areas. And the controls in this section are probably the best Sonic has felt ever since the adventure days. I'm not joking, it is so fun just to run through, boost on, and just collect everything. And this game is one of those games that, despite how open and how big it is, it's honestly really great to play in short bursts, because you can just sort of load the game up again, perfect for the Steam Deck by the way, where you can just load the game up, do like one or two little mini challenges or puzzles, pause the game, come back to it a bit later on, and I love that about it. It's very open-ended, it's very large, but it's also pretty casual in that regard. And honestly, it's just extremely fun. I absolutely adored my entire time in the open zone. The second gameplay style on offer, the cyberspace, it's okay. However, the biggest problem I have with this right now is that the controls for this are extremely stiff in comparison to the open world, and if I'm to be perfectly honest, I'm not the biggest fan of these. The levels themselves are fine, in fact I do enjoy the cyberspace stages, but the controls take a lot of getting used to. And part of what is good about the cyberspaces is actually the level design, which is kind of interesting because this is also a bad thing in the same way if you think about it, because the level design is not only decent, it's ripped out of previous Sonic games. So there are some levels that are literally one-to-one rips of stages you've had in the past, like say Sky Rail from Sonic Adventure 2 for instance. So yeah, the biggest issue I have with this is the controls are extremely stiff, and it would feel significantly more fun if it used similar controls to the open zone, in my opinion. Of course, in the open zone though, I will say the controls are quite interesting because you can actually modify them. Now, right from the get-go, when you start off the game for the first time, the game will ask you if you want to play an action style or speed style, and that will tweak your controls slightly depending which one you pick. However, you can also go into the options menu and there's tons of sliders that you're able to pick and choose from in order to change things like Sonic's running speed, his boosting speed. Hell, you can even manipulate how much momentum affects him in certain aspects when you have like this option. I think it's called bounce, so you push all the way up. It's nuts. During the course of all the open zones, however, you will also be able to find special seeds that you can pick up and use, which can actually be used to upgrade your strength and defense. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. There's stats in this one. Ho 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 ho. And on top of those, there are also little creatures littered around called the Coco, which you can rescue. Now, doing this will allow you to increase your overall ring count and your top speed that Sonic can go to. And upgrading the strength to power is super duper quick, because all you really have to do is get the items and then go to the Hermit Coco, who is hidden somewhere in each open zone. Talk to him and you'll take all of your seeds and gobble them all up. And basically he'll give you a power boost equivalent to the number of seeds that you have collected. So you can go from level 1 attack to like level 20 or even higher if you have a ton of seeds. However, to upgrade your maximum rings and top speed, you will need to turn the Coco throughout the island into a Coco Elder, who much like the Hermit Coco can be found. And he will upgrade one of these stats one at a time. Unfortunately, because it's one at a time, this can be extremely tedious to upgrade, and honestly, I really wish that he had like some kind of, maybe like a counter on how many times you want to upgrade, because it is ridiculously slow to level up Sonic in these stats, especially if you're trying to go for level 99 to get the achievement. Like, my god. Of course, another interesting feature of this game is that Sonic also has a skill tree for one of the first times as well. Now, Sonic did sort of have like a skill tree sort of situation going on all the way back in like Sonic and the Secret Rings, but here it's not too overbearing and it's actually pretty simple to go through. Basically, as you fight enemies and progress through and just basically continue going through the game and doing tricks and stuff as you bounce off springs, you will gain experience points. And these experience points can then be spent on skills that you can use for combat. Now, to start off with, Sonic's main moves, there's not too much to his moves. It's basically a typical mash the square or X button to punch. But as time goes on, you'll be able to gain abilities such as the Sonic Boom, which is an onslaught of lasers shooting from him, and the ability to use Sonic's new Psy-Loop ability to basically, well, spin around enemies rapidly and immediately send them into the air. And basically, as you progress through the game, Sonic gains more and more skills to make the combat a bit better. Because this game, for the first time in, well, probably since the Hedgehog in Sonic Unleashed, there's a full-blown combat system in the game, folks, where enemies will pop up and you will have to deal with them. Now, the enemies you do fight are all actually pretty well done, and it's not a case of just mash the X button to get on by. Now, don't get me wrong, that is what the combat does boil down to at the very beginning, because the only thing you can do at the start is basically mash the X button. Yeah, but basically, as you move on, the enemies you face will have basically more, I guess, nuance to them, so you'll be able to fight them, but you'll have to learn as to what their patterns are. It's not mindless. You need to think when you're fighting these enemies, otherwise they can take you down surprisingly quickly, especially until you get the defense and ring stats up, because this isn't a hard game by any means, but you still have to pay attention. Now, there are 5 major open zones in order to progress throughout the course of the game, and each of them have their own strengths and weaknesses. So, talking about the first island, for example, we've got Kronos, which is a good introduction to the whole concept of open zones, and it honestly starts out pretty straightforward with a simple tutorial sequence in order to, to get the new players to grasp the new concepts that the game introduces. And after the initial tutorial sequence, the island opens up significantly, and then the player is basically free to roam and go wherever he or she pleases. And it is absolutely fantastic. What can I say? Like, the whole sense of freedom you get is through the roof. Now, Island 2, however, is where the open zone idea really starts coming to life, where you can find yourself just basically having a blast, just exploring and figuring out the best way that you're able to get to places. And honestly, it's a bit of a game in its own right just to figure out how to get to certain areas. It's actually really, really great fun. However, there are some enemies on this island in particular that are a little annoying, because there's a certain flying enemy that can just steal all camera control away from the player whenever you run past. And this can be especially irritating if you're just rushing from one point of the zone to another. It can be an absolute nightmare, what can I tell you. And Island 3 itself can also be pretty tricky to navigate, and has one hell of a pain of a minigame towards the end. I'm not going to spoil what that minigame is, but trust me, around the end of this island, there's an annoying minigame. And there's even sections where I kind of got stuck for a while due to the way that I was playing the game. Because when I went through this game, I kind of went for completing through all of the side stuff first before going to the story. And unfortunately, at this point in the game, that becomes a bit of a problem, because there's a section of the world that you cannot get to because there's a bridge that leads to another island. Now, you can easily run up it, and you can clearly easily make it to the other island if you just sort of jump and boost off. However, there is an invisible wall there blocking until I get to a story point. And this area kind of taught me to do the story basically whenever I can't figure out how to get to an area. But it was a bit of a showstopper, I have to admit, because it spent ages just trying to figure out how to get to this one landmass, and it was just a case of just do the story and I'd be able to get there. Then we have Island 4. Now, for actual spoiler reasons, I'm not going to say much about this island. All I'm going to say, though, is Island 4 is without a doubt the weakest island in the game. And the big reason for this is because basically you have all this landmass that has tons of detail, and you don't get to see barely any of it if you're just going from point to point. Essentially, the island feels like there is a ton of content. When we get to the final island of the game, however, it turns great again. However, I will say the final bosses of the game, without me going into detail, are pretty underwhelming, in my opinion, from a gameplay perspective specifically, especially when you compare it to the other bosses in the game. Now, throughout the course of the game, there is plenty of jank, don't get me wrong, this game is by far perfect. There is some spotty collision detection in places where, like for example, the very first boss of the game, Asura, or the first Guardian I suppose, not the first real boss, I'm clipped through him a good few times trying to run up his arms, and there's occasional bugs that happen when you're running about and going into the scripted sequence. For example, 2D sections not properly locking me into the correct perspective, so I walked out by accident, and other issues where I just go straight through a spring, or a rocket booster that I'm meant to grab that I don't tend to grab. Little quirks like that. I've even had one moment in cyberspace where I had to completely replay one level multiple times because a boost pad did not work properly and Sonic would not connect to a hill properly that the boost pad was on, thus basically falling to his doom multiple times. Well, tell a lie, he didn't really fall to his doom as much as he just awkwardly bounced on the boost pad until the game went, oh shit, and connected him. Now, this didn't destroy the level, but it basically ruined my S rank run, so I had to completely reset multiple times to get that S rank. Another big element of the game is fishing. Now, you can find Big the Cat as you're exploring the open zones because there are these dedicated fishing zones that you can enter. And within these, you can play a simple, fun, and weirdly relaxing and addicting minigame to collect fish. Now, throughout the open zone, you do need to collect purple coins to access these, and basically they can just be found pretty much everywhere. Although from time to time, special events called Starfall events will happen, usually in the night times, where enemies will respawn and these shiny shards will fall from the sky. And when you collect these will bring up a slot reel, which will allow you to basically gain way more coins for fishing, more than you may even need. However, the slot reel that shows up when this event happens is extremely distracting, and I kind of wish there was a way to just turn off the graphic to make it so it's running in the background so you can still get the coins, or even just minimize it because it is so huge on the screen and very distracting. But when you successfully get fish from this fishing minigame, you get tokens that you can spend on specific items such as Eggman memos, which are actually a really good read, well, listen, I suppose, or well, both, because they're voice, but they're also text. And they give you tons of background info of what's going on behind the scenes of the game. And honestly, if you're a Sonic fan, some of these are going to be great. You can even get progression items through this minigame, such as keys, tokens, or portal gears. So if you really wanted, so say you didn't like the boss fights against the Guardians, or even don't like doing cyberspace stages, well, you can just fish and get the stuff instead. Hell, you can even get level up items in order to speed up the grind of leveling Sonic up to maximum. Now, for the soundtrack to the game, it's extremely varied, and I love it. To start things off, all of the main open zone theme songs, all open zone musics, they're very calming and chill, and honestly, it's lovely to just explore the open zone with these running in the background. Whereas when you get into like Guardian boss battles, they tend to have like this 80s techno-ish sort of vibe going on whenever I noticed. And then when you go into cyberspace, the music switches and does a complete 180 into like this sort of EDM banger of a soundtrack. What can I tell you? And when it comes to the bosses, oh my god. It goes straight up metalcore, and it is amazing. Absolutely amazing. So for the story of this one, ladies and gentlemen, basically, Sonic and Tails and Knuckles all find themselves heading towards the mysterious Starfall Islands because, well, the Chaos Emerald sort of just went up and noped out of wherever they were. And they all seem to have collected on these sets of islands, so it's up to Sonic to basically figure out why they're there and collect them all again. However, along the way, trouble strikes and all the characters sort of get trapped into cyberspace, including Sonic, and that's where the game sort of begins. And that's about as much as I'll say about the general story because I don't want to spoil anything. All I'm going to say is there's a lot to love about the story of this one. And the script of this game in general is such a 180 from Sonic Forces, and you know what, every Sonic game since, I want to say, Colors, outright. Like, Ian Flynn has taken over the reins as the lead writer, and the Sonic characters, they feel like actual characters again. They actually feel like their old selves before Sonic Colors, and I am absolutely all for it. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of people will probably be rolling their eyes going, oh, that means it's gonna be dark and edgy, and don't get me wrong, the game has its, not so much dark, but it has a somber tone to it. But it doesn't take itself in an edgy way. It knows when to have a joke, and it knows when to be serious. It's like I've always argued, Sonic should always have been like a shonen character, where it shouldn't be held back to just Saturday morning cartoon stuff, and this is exactly the tone that I want this series to continue with. And even in regards to the writing, it's tackling previous issues from the previous games with the writing. For example, certain characters like Tails, this game is literally jump pedaling off of the backbone of the terrible writing and characteral issues that popped up to help these characters grow and naturally change. And I love that so much. There is so much to love here. There's also just plenty of references here too that will just please longtime Sonic fans, and honestly, it's those fans, the people who grew up from, at the very least, the Adventure era, up until now playing these games, who will appreciate the writing style the most. And even people who grew up with the classic games as well, there's even nods to you. There's nods to everything in the series, and this, honestly, is the first time in years that the Sonic universe feels like an actual ongoing narrative. The world feels like it's an actual continuation of the entire series, rather than taking place in an isolated experience, you know? it also makes the previous games retroactively feel a part of a larger universe too. Now, don't get me wrong, just because Sonic fans will also get the most out of this doesn't mean that non-Sonic fans won't enjoy the story as well. I think there's enough meat here that even non-Sonic fans will be able to enjoy it, because the way the characters are written together, you just kind of get engrossed in the mystery of the islands, and just you want to see how the characters are going to interact, what they're going to say next, what they're going to do next. You get invested. At the very least, I did. There's even moments where I just like I had some feelings. I was like, oh god, there's feelings in a Sonic game. What is going on? Now, the Guardian boss battles that you fight to collect the gears throughout the course of the open zones, they're all pretty dang fun. Each of them require their own little strategies to defeat, and honestly, I love going toe-to-toe to them. Especially when you have, like, Asura, the big towering behemoth that slams his hands down. You have to climb up his arms and boop him on the head. Or even something as simple as the Shinobi, which is a typical, like, standard humanoid-shaped-ish enemy, which you have to fight in a more traditional way. And then you have weird things like this massive tower that shoots lasers and shit at you, and you have to grind on these rails to basically show his weak point. And honestly, every single one of these Guardians, for the most part, apart from maybe some reuse later on, are honestly really, really good fun. And when they even get reused, they get new moves, they get new strats, so you're going to be learning and fighting them and figuring things out constantly. Then we have the game's major boss battles against the Titans, and these are an absolute highlight of the game. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna show any footage of any of these. You need to experience these firsthand, because these are absolutely amazing. They are very bombastic. They can be pretty damn janky in places, do not get me wrong, but the sheer cool factor of fighting these things just makes you forget about all that. And the best way I can describe them is Sonic the Hedgehog meets Metal Gear Rising. It's so good. Now, don't get me wrong, the final two bosses, they're a bit disappointing in comparison to the first three, with the second boss overall being my absolute favourite in the game. But when you do fight the final boss, I am going to say this, you're going to want to probably fight it in hard mode, because the entire main final boss is just scrapped on normal difficulty. You skip him. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So you want to do it in hard mode, because basically there's absolutely nothing to indicate that this boss even exists otherwise. So just a little heads up for people playing this for the first time. You can switch the difficulty from normal to hard right before the final boss as well, so if you don't want to, you know, worry about the rest of the game being too difficult for you, drop the difficulty, get to the final boss, then you can raise the difficulty again for him. But there we are, ladies and gentlemen, that is Sonic Frontiers, and honestly, Sonic is back. Like I said, I love this game through and through. Now, don't get me wrong, there's problems with it, and there's jank with it, and there's a lot of it. But in terms of, like, building a new formula and having a skeleton there, we have the skeleton now. And honestly, how much fun I've had with this game, for me, it's probably a solid 8 out of 10, I have to say. Now, what can I say is my favourite Sonic game? I can't say for sure on one account, which is I'm in a honeymoon phase now. I've just played it for the first time, so I'm going to have to see how things go in the months. But I loved it throughout, and honestly, it is such a good, great, fun time. And again, like I said, the skeleton is here, so if Sonic Team take what they've taken from this game, iterate upon it, improve upon it, you know, maybe polish it up a bit more, deal with the scrap, deal with the pop-in issues, because I forgot to mention there are some major pop-in issues throughout the course as well of the game. But deal with all these background, behind-the-scene issues, maybe smooth up the cyberspace stages so they're not so stiff feeling. And honestly, the next Sonic game I can see being a winner. Like, honestly, 100%. I mean, this one I think is a winner, so yeah. For my honest opinion, this game is amazing. It's like, speaking as a Sonic fan, this is a game I've wanted for years. Basically, and this is coming from someone who didn't mind the last 10 years of Sonic games as much as most people online. You know, I still had my fun with them, but oh, that just blows everything from the previous 10 years of Sonic games out the water easily. Like, easily. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call it here. Thank you all for watching. Don't be sheepish. Go ahead and check out this new frontier. Because, I'm looking forward to exploring the rest of these new frontiers if this is the start of a new era. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. I'll see you again. Bye.